In June 1941, Moscow was a city built on confidence. The Stalin-Hitler Pact of 1939 had transformed the Soviet capital into a place of official certainty. Germany was not an enemy. It was a distant power, bound by treaty, separated by ideology but united by calculated interest. Stalin believed the agreement would hold. He believed it so completely that he ignored warnings from his own intelligence services. He ignored reports that German armies were massing on the border. He ignored letters from spies and diplomats telling him that invasion was coming. Moscow was a Soviet city in the fullest sense, a place where ideology had been carved into architecture, where monuments celebrated the revolution, where the five-pointed stars atop the Kremlin towers seemed to promise eternal victory. The city had grown during 2 decades of Soviet rule. New buildings rose, new roads were laid. A brand new Moscow metro with its grand stations decorated like palaces had opened in 1935. It was supposed to be the People's Palace, a monument to socialist achievement. In the spring and early summer of 1941, Moscow felt secure. Then on June 22, 1941, at 4 o'clock in the morning, everything changed.
Внимание, говорит Москва. Передаем важное правительственное сообщение. Граждане и гражданки Советского Союза, сегодня в 4 часа утра, без всякого объявления войны, германские вооруженные силы атаковали границы Советского Союза. Началась Великая Отечественная война советского народа против немецко-фашистских захватчиков. Наше дело правое, враг будет разбит, победа будет за нами.
More than 3 million German soldiers attacked across the Soviet border in what was the largest military invasion in history. Codenamed Operation Barbarossa, the assault was designed to be swift and decisive. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse within weeks. His generals thought they would be in Moscow by September. Moscow would fall. The war would be won. At first, their confidence seemed justified. In the first 6 months of the war, the Red Army suffered catastrophic losses. More than 2.5 million Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner. The Wehrmacht advanced across Soviet territory with stunning speed, using blitzkrieg tactics that had conquered Poland and France. German tanks rolled forward. German planes ruled the sky. Nothing seemed able to stop them. By October 1941, the Germans had reached Mozhaisk and Volokolamsk, towns only 70 miles west of Moscow. The capital, which had felt so secure, suddenly realized it was facing annihilation. The confidence evaporated. In its place came something darker, a mounting terror that perhaps Hitler was right, that perhaps the Soviet Union could not survive. Red Square was the heart of Soviet power. It was where the revolution had been celebrated. It was where parades displayed Soviet strength. It was where the Kremlin, the seat of government, looked out over the vast open space with its red walls and white stone. For decades, Red Square had been a symbol of Soviet permanence, a place where the future seemed guaranteed, where the socialist state seemed eternal. In October 1941, Red Square became something different, a test of will. As German forces approached Moscow, panic spread through the city. On October 15th, Stalin ordered the evacuation of the government, the Communist Party leadership, and the general staff to the city of Kuibyshev, 600 miles to the southeast. The evacuation was supposed to be secret, but word leaked out. Factories and offices were abandoned without explanation. People thought Moscow was being surrendered. Tens of thousands tried to flee, mobbing railway stations, jamming roads, desperate to escape. Looting began. Riots broke out. Some people called out pro-Nazi slogans, believing the Germans had already won, that further resistance was pointless. Discipline collapsed. Order dissolved. Then Stalin made a decision that changed everything. On October 20th, he announced that he would not evacuate. He would remain in Moscow. He would fight. He ordered the evacuation halted. He provided food and money to workers to reassure them. He used the secret police, the NKVD, to restore order, executing those caught spreading panic or looting. Within days, something remarkable happened. Confidence returned. Factories resumed production. Workers returned. the panic subsided, but Stalin wanted to do something more dramatic, something that would tell the world that Moscow was not surrendering. Against the advice of his generals, when German forces were little more than 50 miles away, Stalin ordered a military parade. On November 7, 1941, to mark the 24th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, Red Square would host a display of Soviet military power. The parade began at 8 o'clock in the morning. Soldiers emerged from the Kremlin and marched across Red Square with their banners unfurled. Artillery pieces rolled past. Infantry units in formation moved with precision and determination. Stalin stood watching, his dark coat and military uniform visible on the platform. For 25 minutes, the soldiers marched, saluted, and turned to face the Kremlin. The radio broadcast the event live. The whole world heard it. Then something extraordinary happened. As soon as the parade ended, the soldiers did not go to barracks. They did not go to rest. They climbed into trucks and vehicles and drove directly to the front lines. They marched straight from Red Square to battle against the German armies surrounding Moscow. Many of them would be killed in the fighting that followed, but they went anyway, having demonstrated by their presence that Moscow stood firm. The Germans, shocked by the parade, ordered their air force to bomb Red Square at any cost, but the Soviet air defense was prepared. German aircraft were shot down. No bombs fell on the square. The parade lasted only 25 minutes, but in those 25 minutes, Stalin showed the world something crucial: that the Soviet Union would not surrender, that Moscow would not fall, that even when facing defeat, the nation would fight. Today, Red Square remains the center of Russian power and commemoration. The parade of November 7, 1941 is remembered as a turning point, not because it changed the battle, but because it changed the will of the people to resist. Every November 7th, Russia still holds a military parade on Red Square to honor that moment when the city on the edge of defeat chose to stand and fight. The Kremlin was where the Soviet Union was governed. Behind its red walls stood palaces, government buildings, ancient cathedrals, and the seat of power. It was from the Kremlin that Stalin ruled, that decisions affecting the fate of the nation were made, that the strategy to defend Moscow was determined. The Kremlin was not just a building, it was the physical manifestation of Soviet authority. During the war, the Kremlin became the center of a desperate effort to save the nation. Stalin established the State Defense Committee, the GKO, which functioned as a war cabinet. It included his closest associates: Molotov, the foreign minister; Beria, the secret police chief; Voroshilov, the military advisor. Stalin himself assumed the title of Supreme Commander-in-Chief. He made the critical decisions about how to defend Moscow, where to commit forces, when to retreat, when to hold the line. These were not easy decisions. By October, German forces had captured Smolensk, seized Bryansk, and reached Mozhaisk. The defensive line that was supposed to protect Moscow was collapsing. General Georgy Zhukov, who had been recalled from Leningrad to defend Moscow, reported that without massive reinforcements, the capital would fall. But reinforcements did not exist. The Red Army had suffered such catastrophic losses in the first 4 months of war that there seemed to be nothing left to defend with. Yet Stalin and his command made a series of decisions that would prove crucial. First, they decided not to abandon the industrial resources around Moscow. Instead, factories were to be converted to war production on the spot. An automobile factory became a submachine gun armory. A clock factory began making mine detonators. Every available resource was mobilized for defense. Second, they decided to use depth as a strategy. Rather than defending a single line, they created multiple defensive lines deeper into Soviet territory around Moscow. The Mozhaisk line, the Mozhaisk-Volokolamsk line, defenses to the north and south of the city. Each was designed to slow the German advance and buy time for reserves to arrive. Third, they made the politically risky decision to transfer divisions from distant parts of the Soviet Union, from Siberia, from Central Asia, from the Far East, and bring them to Moscow. This meant leaving those regions vulnerable to Japanese attack, but Stalin decided the risk was worth taking. Fourth, and most importantly, Stalin decided that the capital would not be surrendered. The government would not permanently evacuate. A symbolic presence would remain. Even when the evacuation began on October 15th, Stalin made it clear that he would stay. This decision rippled through the entire society. If Stalin would not abandon Moscow, then neither would ordinary citizens. If the leader would risk his life, then everyone would have to risk theirs. From within the Kremlin, the chain of command was established. Orders flowed outward to armies, to commanders, to defensive positions around the city. Information flowed back in, telling Stalin how the battle was progressing. As German forces crept closer, the pressure intensified. Military maps in Kremlin command posts showed German positions advancing day by day. The front line inched closer to Moscow, but the Kremlin also represented something beyond mere military command. It represented the legitimacy of Soviet power. If the Kremlin fell, if the capital was captured, then no matter how many armies survived, the Soviet Union as a political entity would be fatally wounded. Hitler understood this. He wanted to capture Moscow not just for its strategic value, but for its symbolic meaning. The fall of Moscow would mean the fall of Soviet authority. That is why Stalin and his command held on. That is why they committed reserves they could not spare. That is why they made decisions that seemed reckless but that bought the time needed to turn the tide from the Kremlin on. December 6, 1941, Soviet forces launched a counteroffensive that drove the Germans back from Moscow. For the first time in the war, the seemingly unstoppable Wehrmacht had been stopped and then pushed back into retreat. The Kremlin still stands today. The palaces remain. The red walls still circle the center of Russian power. Inside those walls, decisions that changed the course of history were made by men facing impossible odds and choosing to fight anyway. The Moscow Metro was supposed to be the pride of Soviet architecture. It had opened only 6 years before the war, in 1935. Its stations were designed as palaces for the people, grand halls with chandeliers, mosaics, sculptures, marble columns. Each station celebrated Soviet achievement and socialist ideals. The metro was meant to symbolize the future, a gleaming underground city where ordinary workers could travel through beauty and grandeur. Then the bombs came. When the first air raid warning sounded on July 22, 1941, more than 500,000 people descended into the metro stations seeking shelter. The government had forbidden the use of the metro as a bomb shelter. Officials feared that people would refuse to leave once underground, that the system would become clogged with civilians instead of transporting workers and soldiers. But when bombs fell, the orders did not matter. Muscovites came anyway, filling the platforms, the tunnels, the escalators, desperate to find safety. After the first night, the government realized that trying to prevent people from using the metro was futile. Instead, it issued new rules. The metro would operate for passenger traffic until 10 o'clock at night. Then, from 10 in the evening until 5 in the morning, it would function as a bomb shelter. When air raids began, trains stopped running immediately. The platforms and tunnels were prepared to receive thousands of people seeking protection from the bombs falling above. At first, conditions were chaotic. On the night of July 23rd, one shell damaged the tunnel between Smolenskaya and Arbatskaya stations. Another hit the overpass of a metro bridge. A third exploded at the entrance to Arbatskaya station. Dozens of people were killed, some crushed in panicked stampedes at the station entrances. It became clear that rules were needed to prevent chaos. The government began installing infrastructure to make the metro functional as a shelter. By October and November 1941, when bombing was at its worst, a total of 3,800 cribs for infants and 4,600 beds for adults were installed in the metro stations. The system that had been designed to move people above ground became a city beneath the earth. Families claimed spots on the platforms. Some stations became de facto neighborhoods, with the same families returning night after night, claiming the same locations, creating routines that mimicked normal life. The metro fulfilled multiple purposes simultaneously. Some stations became military command centers. Chisty Prudy Station was closed to the public and converted into the headquarters of the Red Army's operational command. Stalin sometimes appeared there to meet with his generals. A plywood partition shielded the platform from passing trains. Reinforced concrete walls were erected to protect against blast waves if bombs fell directly above. Other stations served as hospitals where medical staff treated the wounded. Still others became centers for administration, where government functions continued even as the city above was under assault. By day, the metro continued transporting millions of Muscovites. By night, it became the refuge for the city, a place where families huddled together in the tunnels, in the stations, waiting for dawn. According to records, during the worst bombing in 1941, the metro provided shelter to a total of 13.9 million people. The Moscow metro that had been designed to celebrate Soviet progress became an instrument of Soviet survival. The metro was staffed almost entirely by women after men were conscripted for the army. On March 8, 1942, the first all-women train crew appeared. with female drivers operating trains that carried both passengers and the nation's hopes. They continued their work despite the constant threat of bombing, despite the strain of operating beneath a city under attack. The construction of the metro continued even during the war. New lines were being laid, new stations were being built. In 1943, a tunnel was constructed under the Moskva River. In 1944, another section was opened. Even as the city fought for its survival, it was simultaneously planning for its future. Today, when you ride the Moscow metro, you travel through history. The stations are still decorated with the grandeur they were given in the 1930s and 1940s. The dark marble, the chandeliers, the sculptures, all remind you of a time when these spaces served as shelters, when thousands of people slept in the stations each night, when the metro was the difference between life and death. If you know where to look, you can still see signs of that time. There are blocked stairways and sealed passages. There are stations that go deeper than necessary for normal transportation, built to serve as nuclear shelters in the Cold War that came after. The metro remains a monument to the war, a place where Soviet engineering and Soviet determination literally saved lives. The defense of Moscow was decided not in the capital itself, but in the towns and villages west of the city. By October 1941, the German Army Group Center had advanced to within striking distance of Moscow. At Volokolamsk and Mozhaisk, the Red Army established defensive lines that were meant to stop the German advance and buy time for Moscow to prepare. These were not fortresses. They were hastily constructed earthworks, trenches dug by workers using picks and shovels, anti-tank ditches carved into the frozen ground, positions established with whatever forces could be spared. The situation was desperate. According to military records, only about 90,000 Soviet soldiers initially manned the Mozhaisk defensive line. Facing them were nearly 2 million German troops, equipped with tanks, aircraft, and artillery. The disparity in forces seemed to guarantee German victory. The Germans should have broken through easily. Instead, something unexpected happened. Soviet resistance stiffened. General Georgy Zhukov, the commander responsible for Moscow's defense, made a decision that seemed reckless. Rather than trying to hold all positions with the limited forces available, he concentrated Soviet defenders at 4 critical points along the defensive line. He gave up ground, withdrew when necessary, but held the critical terrain. He made the Germans pay for every mile of advance. Most importantly, he bought time. By October, Russia's Rasputitsa began. This was the season of mud, autumn rains that turned roads into quagmires that became impassable. German tanks, designed for rapid maneuver over firm terrain, bogged down in the mud. German vehicles got stuck. Supplies could not be delivered. The blitzkrieg tactics that had been so successful in Poland and France became ineffective in the Russian mud. This was not a coincidence. Zhukov had positioned Soviet forces on the roads and high ground that the Germans needed to advance. He forced the Germans to fight for. Every river crossing, every town, every defensive position. The Germans had to move slowly, fighting battles of attrition, using up ammunition and fuel and the lives of their soldiers. Each day of delay meant the Russian winter was coming closer. Meanwhile, Soviet reinforcements were arriving. From Siberia, from Central Asia, from the Far East, the Red Army was transferring fresh divisions to Moscow. Stalin had calculated that the risk of leaving those regions vulnerable was less than the risk of losing the capital. Division after division arrived at the front around Mozhaisk and Volokolamsk. The Germans, expecting a quick breakthrough, suddenly faced an enemy that grew stronger with each passing day. In November, the ground froze. The weather turned brutally cold. Temperatures dropped to -20, -30 degrees Celsius. For the first time, German tanks could maneuver off-road again over the frozen ground. German forces launched a final offensive to break through to Moscow. The fighting was fierce and terrible. Soviet soldiers fought knowing they were outnumbered. They fought knowing that if the German breakthrough succeeded, Moscow would fall. They fought in the snow and ice, in temperatures that killed the unprepared, in conditions of unimaginable hardship. Many of them would not survive, but they held the line. At Mozhaisk and Volokolamsk, at 100 other towns with names that are now forgotten, Soviet soldiers and officers threw themselves at the German advance and stopped it. By December 5th, German forces had come to within 30 kilometers of Moscow. They were exhausted. Their supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Their soldiers were freezing without proper winter clothing. The blitzkrieg had failed. The easy victory that Hitler had promised had become an increasingly bloody war of attrition. That night, Soviet forces launched a counteroffensive. The Germans, for the first time in the war, began to retreat. They were pushed back from Mozhaisk and Volokolamsk. They were driven away from Moscow's approaches. It took weeks for the Germans to stabilize their line, far to the west of where it had been in November. The villages and towns of the Mozhaisk and Volokolamsk lines were devastated. They were rebuilt after the war, but the scars of battle were deep. What happened there in October and November 1941 was forgotten by much of the world, overshadowed by the later battles of Stalingrad and Kursk. But without the stand at Mozhaisk and Volokolamsk, Moscow would have fallen, and the course of the war would have been entirely different.